Hello ladies and gentlemen, boys and ghouls, and welcome to another episode of Comic Crypt. In case you missed it last week, our normal comic class series, in which we just geek out about comic books, is on hold for the entire month of October, because all month long on this channel, we are celebrating everything spooky and scary. So comic class is being replaced by Comic Crypt, where every single week I am going to spotlight another horrifying comic that you can go out there and buy at your local comic book store right now. And today I am going to spotlight a series that came out this year from Image Comics. Image is always really good at introducing me to brand new creators in the world of horror comics, and this year they brought me Porsnak Pichashot, who is an award-winning editor for his work over at DC on Swamp Thing, and before that he was an independent filmmaker, but this is the first series that he has actually written, and wow, he knocked this out of the park. The series that I am talking about is Infidel, and Infidel in its most simplest terms is a haunted house story. However, it is far more complex than just that, and it has a lot to talk about. It has a huge message behind it, and honestly, I love that because I think some of the best horror movies and series out there have all been things that were not afraid to try and tackle relevant issues. They were not afraid to try and talk about stories that were very relevant to the time that they were being made. I mean, if you look back at the history of horror films, a lot of the horror that we got in the 1950s about creatures coming from space, that was all inspired by the space race with Russia. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which came out at that time, was all a giant metaphor for how America was afraid of communism. Another great example of what I'm talking about would be the original Halloween movie. That movie was set in the 1970s, and in the 1970s, everybody was moving out of the cities and moving into suburbs because they thought the suburbs would be so much safer and a safe place to raise your kids. And then all of a sudden movies like Halloween start having slashers come to the suburbs and attack kids to try and play on that fear that everyone had, that feeling of security that everyone found in the suburbs. Yeah, some of the best horror out there have been films that looked at the modern landscape of the world and said, okay, what kind of a chilling story can we tell playing off of the zeitgeist that is going on in our culture? What is something that we can latch onto that everyone is feeling, that everyone has to experience, and let's try and play that up as a form of horror. And Infidel is really one of the best examples I have seen of that in the 21st century. It is really one of the best stories that I have seen, kind of playing on our current political landscape, of playing on fears and discriminations and prejudices that a lot of people experience these days. Because the story of Infidel, it stars a Muslim woman who is living in a building in New York, but it is a building where just the year before she moved in there, another Muslim man living there attempted to set off a bomb, and now every single person in that building keeps looking at her like she's a terrorist. They keep looking at her with discrimination in their eyes. This is a film that is talking about what it's like to experience racism and bigotry and xenophobia. And she's not just experiencing these prejudices from her next door neighbor or from the outside world. She's experiencing it within her own home because she just moved in with her new fiance, and her fiance's mother makes no bones about it. She is not happy with the fact that her son is dating a Muslim woman. She is very bigoted herself. She is constantly laying one bit of prejudice slip here or there. She's constantly, quote unquote, forgetting things that she should not do, and it's very clear she's doing this just to mess with our protagonist. So our protagonist, whose name is Aisha, she is trying her hardest to try and make it through every single day with all of this weighing on her shoulders. However, to make things worse, the building that she's in is also haunted, and it's haunted by a ghost that is targeting specifically her. So it's hard enough that every single person in her building is looking at her like she's an enemy. They're constantly watching her and looking for little times that she could possibly slip up so that they can blame her for anything that they want. And to make matters worse, every time she turns around, she sees a demon just staring her down. And I have got to give props to the artist on this book. Aaron Campbell and Jose Villarrubia, those two came together and really made this ghost chilling. I am not the biggest fan of ghost in comics. I've never really seen a ghost in a comic that made me look at it and go, oh yeah, that's really creepy. I just kind of look at them and it's like, okay, well, it's a ghost. It's a thing that I've seen before. The ghost in here, when they're like merging with the walls, their faces are just popping out and shrieking in Aisha's face, or they're just kind of merging with reality. They constantly look like they are making everything around them just melt as they're trying to merge into our dimension. Like every time that they appear, it really feels like, oh, all of reality and time and space is collapsing around them. It creates this claustrophobic sense almost, because it's not like, oh, there's someone standing over there in the corner. It makes it feel like, oh, the entire room came to life and it's closing in on me. It constantly gives you this feeling of there is no escape from this thing. I can't run from it. And that's what makes the ghost in this so incredibly effective. Every single time that it pops up, it does make you jump. It does startle you, which again, I never really get that feeling when reading a ghost story in a comic. And it's not just the ghosts that look so creepy. The environments are incredible in this book. This book is the definition of atmospheric. There are shots of just regular old apartment buildings in this book that sent chills up my spine. And this ghost isn't just here as a coincidence. Ghosts can be messengers of not just spirits that have passed on into the next world, but they can also just be the embodiment of emotions. And without getting into any spoilers here, because there is kind of a twist about what the ghost is, basically the best way that I can sum it up without any spoilers is that the ghost is kind of the embodiment of xenophobia, is kind of the embodiment of hatred, and that is why it is targeting Aisha. It's basically taking all the fear of all the people living in this building after what happened there the year before, and it's targeting Aisha, and it's purposely not only trying to destroy her, it's trying to make her destroy herself. It's trying to put Aisha in a corner where she will be forced to act out in a way that will basically confirm all the suspicions and bigotry of all the people around her. And as I said, one of the things that I really appreciate about this is that it is a book that is trying to play off of a lot of fears and intolerance that are out there in the world today. And you can tell when you read this book that this is all coming from a very personal place for this writer. This writer definitely has had to deal with this stuff in his own life, and he is putting a lot of that into this book. That's another thing that I really appreciate about this. You can really feel his heart in this book. You can really tell that it is a very personal story for him, and that you can absolutely grasp that sense of reality, which again makes all of this even more chilling. When you're reading a spooky, scary ghost book, but it all feels like it's a fantasy, yeah, you know, it never really gets that terrifying. But when it can play off of stuff in the real world, it gives it that extra punch. It gives it that extra feeling of, oh God, okay, even if there aren't ghosts in the real world, this is something else to be even more afraid of. There are several very smart discussions that this book has about the subjects of prejudice, and honestly, it's kind of stunning to me that a modern day horror book is able to have that discussion so much better than pretty much any other series out there. However, I know that there are people out there that's like, hey man, it's really good that this book is having these discussions, but is it scary? This is supposed to be a horror book. Is it a scary horror book? Well, as I said, the ghost is drawn amazingly. The ghost is drawn in a way that never failed to freak me out. But even beyond just what the ghost looks like, the way that it behaves and the stuff that it does with Aisha and the people around her, yeah, that is something that constantly had me gasping. There are things that they introduced in the first issue that I thought, okay, this thing's gonna be like 5 issues long. It's going to play out over the course of all 5 issues. And then, nope, they would have a massive twist happen in the very next issue that made me think, well, now I have no idea what's coming. I was completely invested in this book. Again, I'm not going to spoil anything here, but at the end of issue number 2, I looked at it and went, I have no idea how our character is going to come back. I have no idea after what I just witnessed at the end of issue number 2, they can possibly save the day and everything is going to be alright again, and it continues to get darker from there. But that's what makes you want to keep coming back, because you want to keep seeing, okay, somehow they have to be able to pull all this out. Somehow everything has to work out, right? Right? You actually get so invested in these characters and you care about them so much that you want to keep reading to make sure that they're gonna be okay. And that is what this book does so well. I binge read this thing in one single night simply because I wanted to see what was going to happen to these characters. They make you really want to root them on, and you want to see them succeed and come out okay in the end, but it keeps getting so dark that you don't know if it's going to be possible. You have no idea how anyone is going to be able to make it out of this at the end. But you want to keep reading in the hopes that they will. But there you go, that is our Comic Crypt recommendation of the day, Infidel. You can go to your local comic book store and look for the trade, which just came out a few weeks ago, or I will put a link to where you can buy the trade on Amazon in the description down below. And remember, anything that you buy on Amazon, as long as you start by going through that link, we get a small cut of the profits. And if you are a member of Comixology, every single issue of this series is only $2 over there, so it is a nice cheap read if you want to go and get the book over there. Thanks again for tuning in today, everyone, and remember to come back next week for another scary comic book recommendation, or follow us every single day this month for something else haunted from the world of geekery as we celebrate THORGIWEEN every single day this month with top 10 scary movie reviews, spooky gameplay. We're doing tons of stuff that you can catch up with, so make sure that you hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss any of it. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and happy Halloween.